Moreover, Ananda, as you are right now once again, does the wonderful pure seeing essence unite with light? Does it unite with darkness? Does it unite with emptiness, or does it unite with solid objects? If it unites with light, then when darkness comes, the characteristic of light is extinguished. How will you be able to see darkness, since the seeing does not unite with the darkness? If you do see darkness, and yet at that time there is no union with the darkness, but rather a union with light, then you would not have seen light. Since you would not have seen light, why is it that when there is union with light, you are able to know clearly that it is light and not darkness? The same is true of his union with darkness, with emptiness, or with solid objects. Ananda said to the Buddha, "World honored one, as I consider it, the source of this wonderful enlightenment does not mix or unite with any conditioned mundane object, or with the mind's speculation. Is that the case?" The Buddha said, "Now you say further that the enlightened nature is neither mixed nor united. So now I ask you further, as to this wonderful seeing essence neither mixing nor uniting, does it not mix with light? Does it not mix with darkness? Does it not mix with emptiness? Does it not mix with solid objects? If it does not mix with light, then between seeing and light there must be a boundary. Examine it further. What place is light? What place is seeing? Where are the boundaries of the seeing and the light? Ananda, if there is no seeing within the boundaries of light, then there is no contact between them, and clearly one would not know where the characteristic of light is. Then how could its boundaries be realized? As to its not mixing with the darkness, with emptiness, or with solid objects, the principle is the same. Moreover, as to the wonderful thing essence neither mixing nor uniting, does it not unite with light? Does it not unite with darkness? Does it not unite with emptiness? Does it not unite with solid objects? If it does not unite with light, then the seeing and the light are at odds with each other by nature, as are the ear and the light, which do not come in contact. Since the seeing does not know where the characteristic of light is, how can it determine clearly whether there is a union? As to its not uniting with darkness, with emptiness, or with solid objects, the principle is the same. Chapter 3 Ananda, you have not yet understood that all the defiling objects that appear, all the illusory, ephemeral characteristics spring up in the very spot where they also come to an end. There it is called illusory falseness, but their nature is in truth the bright substance of wonderful enlightenment. Thus it is throughout, up to the 5 skandhas and the 6 entrances. So the 12 places and the 18 realms, the union and mixture of various causes and conditions account for their illusory and false existence, and the separation and dispersion of the causes and conditions results in their illusory and false extinction. Who would have thought that production, extinction, coming and going are fundamentally the everlasting wonderful light of the treasury of the first come one, the unmoving, all-pervading perfection, the wonderful nature of true suchness? If within the true and eternal nature one seeks coming and going, confusion and enlightenment, or birth and death, there is nothing that can be obtained. Ananda, why do I say that the 5 skandhas are basically the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the first come one? Ananda, consider this example. When a person who has pure, clear eyes looks at clear, bright emptiness, he sees nothing but clear emptiness, and he is quite certain that nothing exists within it, if for no apparent reason. The person does not move his eyes. The staring will cause fatigue, and then of his own accord he will see strange flowers in space and other unreal appearances that are wild and disordered. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of form. Ananda, the strange flowers come neither from emptiness nor from the eyes. The reason for this Ananda is that if the flowers were to come from emptiness, they would return to emptiness. If there is a coming out and a going in, the space would not be empty. If emptiness were not empty, then it could not contain the appearance of the arisal and extension of the flowers, just as Ananda's body cannot contain another Ananda. If the flowers were to come from the eyes, they would return to the eyes. If the nature of the flowers were to come from the eyes, it would be endowed with the faculty of seeing. If it could see, then when it left the eyes, it would become flowers in space, and when it returned, it should see the eyes. If it did not see, then when it left the eyes, it would obscure emptiness, and when it returned, it would obscure the eyes. Moreover, when you see the flowers, your eyes should not be obscured. So why is it that the eyes are said to be pure and bright when they see clear emptiness? Therefore, you should know that the skandha of form is empty and false because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider the example of a person whose hands and feet are relaxed and at ease and whose entire body is in balance and harmony. He is unaware of his life processes because there is nothing agreeable or disagreeable in his nature. However, for some unknown reason, the person rubs his two hands together in emptiness, and sensations of roughness, smoothness, cold, and warmth seem to arise from nowhere between his palms. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of feeling. Ananda, all this illusory contact does not come from emptiness, nor does it come from the hands. The reason for this Ananda is that if it came from emptiness, then since it could make contact with the palms, why wouldn't it make contact with the body? It should not be that emptiness chooses what it comes in contact with. If it came from the palms, it could be readily felt without waiting for the two palms to be joined. What is more, if it were to come from the palms, then the palms would know when they were joined. When they separated, the contact with return into the arms, the wrists, the bones, and the marrow, and you also should be aware of the cause of its entry. It should also be perceived by the mind because it would behave like something coming and going out, something coming in and going out of the body. In that case, what need would there be to put the two palms together to experience what is called contact? Therefore, you should know that the skandha of feeling is empty and false because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider the example of a person whose mouth waters at the mention of sour plums, or the soles of whose feet tingle when he thinks about walking along a precipice. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of thinking. Ananda, you should know that the watering of the mouth caused by the mention of the plums does not come from the plums, nor does it come from the mouth. The reason for this Ananda is that If it were produced from the plums should speak for themselves. Why wait for someone to mention them? If it came from the mouth itself should hear, and what need would there be to wait for the ear? If the ear alone heard, then why doesn't the water come out of the ear? Thinking about walking along the precipice is explained in the same way. Therefore, you should know that the skanda of thinking is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, the swift rapids whose waves follow upon one another in orderly succession, the ones behind never overtaking the ones in front. You should know that it is the same with the skanda of activity. Ananda, thus, the nature of the flow does not arise because of emptiness, nor does it come into existence because of the water. It is not the nature of water, and yet it is not separate from either emptiness or water. The reason for this Ananda is that if it arose because of emptiness, then the inexhaustible emptiness throughout the 10 directions would become an inexhaustible flow, and all the worlds would inevitably be drowned. If the swift rapids existed because of water, then their nature would differ from that of water, and the location and characteristics of its existence would be apparent. If their nature was simply that of water, then when they became still and clear, they would no longer be made up of water. Suppose it were to separate from emptiness and water. There isn't anything outside of emptiness, and outside of water, there isn't any flow. Therefore, you should know that the skanda of activity is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a man who picks up a Kalavinka pitcher and stops up its two holes. He lifts up the pitcher filled with emptiness, and walking some thousand li away, presents it to another country. You should know that the skanda of consciousness is the same way. Thus, Ananda, the space does not come from one place, nor does it go to another. The reason for this Ananda is that if it were to come from another place, then when the stored up emptiness in the picture went elsewhere, there would be less emptiness in the space in the place where the picture was originally. If it were to enter this region when the holes were unplugged and the pitcher was turned over, one would see emptiness come out. Therefore, you should know that the skanda of consciousness is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Moreover, Ananda, why do I say that the six entrances have their origin in the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the first come one? Ananda, although the eye's staring causes fatigue, the eye and the fatigue originate in body. Staring gives rise to the characteristic of fatigue, because a sense of seeing is stimulated in the midst of the two forms. Defiling objects of light and dark, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the nature of seeing. Apart from the two defiling objects of light and dark, this seeing is ultimately without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that seeing does not come from light or dark, nor does it come forth from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. Why, if it came from light, then it would be extinguished when it is dark, and you would not see darkness. If it came from darkness, then it would be extinguished when it is light, and you would not see light. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of light and dark, A nature of seeing such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came forth from emptiness when it looks in front of you. It sees the shapes of defiling dust turning around. It would see your sense organ. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which sees, what connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the eye entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who suddenly stops up his ears with two fingers, because the sense organ of hearing has become fatigued. A sound is heard in his head. However, both the ears and the fatigue originate in body. Monotony will produce the characteristic of fatigue. Because a sense of hearing is stimulated in the midst of the true forms, defiling objects of movement and stillness, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the nature of hearing. Apart from the two defiling objects of movement and stillness, this hearing is ultimately without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that hearing does not come from movement and stillness, nor does it come from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. Why? If it came from stillness, it would be extinguished when there is movement, and you would not hear movement. If it came from movement, then it would be extinguished when there is stillness, and you would not be aware of the stillness. Suppose that it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of movement and stillness. A nature of hearing such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness. Emptiness would then become hearing and would no longer be emptiness. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which hears, that connection, what connection would it have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the ear entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for its existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who inhales deeply through his nose. After he has inhaled for a long time, it becomes fatigued, and then there is a sensation of cold in the nose. Because of that sensation, there are the distinctions of penetration and obstruction, of emptiness and actuality, and so forth, including all fragrant and stinking vapors. However, both the nose and the fatigue originate in body. Overexertion will produce the characteristic of fatigue, because a sense of smelling is stimulated in the midst of the two forms, defiling objects of penetration and obstruction, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the nature of smelling. Apart from the two defiling objects of penetration and obstruction, this smelling is ultimately without substance. You should know that smelling does not come from penetration and obstruction, nor does it come forth from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. Why? If it came from penetration, the smelling would be extinguished when there is obstruction, and then how could it experience obstruction? If it existed because of obstruction, then when there is penetration, there would be no smelling. In that case, how would the awareness of fragrance, stench, and other such sensations come into being? Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of penetration and obstruction. A nature of smelling such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, smelling itself would turn around and smell your nose. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which smelled, what connection would it have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the nose entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda. Consider, for example, a person who licks his lips with his tongue. His excessive licking causes fatigue. If the person is sick, there will be a bitter flavor. A person who is not sick will have a subtle sweet sensation. Sweetness and bitterness demonstrate the tongue sense of taste. When the organ is inactive, a sense of tastelessness prevails. However, both the tongue and the fatigue originate in body. Stress produces the characteristic of fatigue. Because the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness, as well as tastelessness, stimulate a recognition of taste, which in turn draws in these defiling sensations, it becomes what is known as a sense of taste. Apart from the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness, and apart from tastelessness, the sense of taste is originally without a substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that the perception of sweetness, bitterness, and tastelessness does not come from sweetness or bitterness, nor does it exist because of tastelessness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. For what reason? If it came from sweetness and bitterness, it would cease to exist when tastelessness was experienced. So how could it recognize tastelessness? If it arose from tastelessness, it would vanish when the flavor of sweetness was tasted. So how could it perceive the two flavors of sweet and bitter? Suppose it came from the tongue, which is obviously devoid of the defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness and of tastelessness. An essence of tasting such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness. The sense of taste would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mouth. Suppose, moreover, that it was emptiness itself which tasted. What connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the tongue entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is it spontaneous in nature.